You keep seeking allies because you fear standing alone. Loyalty is a leash, and every hand you hold is a hand guiding your execution. The herd illusion you were trained to believe isolation is danger. Since childhood, every authority repeated the same doctrine: stay together, cooperate, belong. Safety lives in numbers, strength lives in unity. The lone man is the doomed man, but observe nature, not instruction. The herd survives, the predator decides. Groups exist to reduce fear, not to increase power. The herd's purpose is statistical survival, dilute risk across many bodies so no single body matters. Belonging is not strength, it is insurance. Insurance only matters when you expect to lose. When you search for allies, you are not preparing for victory. You are preparing for impact. You are negotiating how the damage will be distributed when reality strikes. This is why belonging feels warm. It anesthetizes responsibility. Inside a group, outcomes are never yours. Failure becomes shared circumstance. Success becomes collective effort. You are never fully blamed, but you are also never fully sovereign. The herd offers emotional protection by confiscating authorship of your life. Understand the cost. Every alliance is an agreement to slow down to the pace of the most uncertain member. Every friendship is a silent contract to filter your thoughts before expression. Every group forces calibration not toward truth, but toward tolerance. A pack does not move at the speed of its strongest wolf. It moves at the speed of the most hesitant one. This is why mediocrity feels comfortable. It is socially frictionless. Your instincts already know this. You have felt the invisible resistance when your ambition sharpened. The subtle jokes. The soft discouragement disguised as concern. The negotiation disguised as advice, not hostility, regulation. Groups regulate deviation because deviation threatens group stability. When you rise too fast, you introduce uncertainty, and uncertainty activates fear. So the herd applies pressure until the anomaly normalizes or leaves. You called this losing people. It was containment. The modern mind worships loyalty because it confuses proximity with support. But proximity is surveillance. The closer people stand to you, the more they monitor your transformation, not consciously, structurally. Your evolution forces them to measure themselves, and most people refuse measurement, so they will not attack your goals directly. They will soften them, delay them, add conditions, introduce timing concerns, recommend patience, suggest balance, never obstruction, always moderation, because moderation preserves the group. You thought allies multiply force. In reality, they multiply negotiation. Every decision now requires psychological coordination, expectations, reassurance, consensus maintenance, emotional accounting. Power cannot exist where constant reassurance is required. A man surrounded by allies must continually explain himself. A man alone only acts. The herd fears isolation because isolation removes excuses. No shared blame, no shared hesitation, no shared reality distortion. Alone, every result points directly back to you. And that is precisely why independence creates authority. Authority is not granted by followers. Authority emerges when a man stops needing witnesses for his decisions, when action no longer requires emotional permission. The herd calls this arrogance, but the herd depends on approval to survive. You are not afraid of being alone. You are afraid of owning the outcome without narrative protection. So you gather allies not for strength, but for interpretation. People who will help explain your life in a way that protects your identity from the consequences of your choices. Remove them and reality becomes sharp, immediate, undeniable. This is the first fracture in the illusion. Allies do not make you stronger. They make your responsibility negotiable. And power begins exactly where negotiation ends. The economy of dependence, you do not seek allies for help. You seek them for relief. Responsibility is pressure. The mind constantly searches for ways to redistribute it, not remove it, distribute it. Shared decisions feel lighter because the burden becomes diluted across multiple consciences. This is the hidden economy behind every alliance. Protection is never free. The price is authorship. When two men decide, neither truly decides. Each becomes partially accountable and therefore partially committed. Partial commitment produces cautious action. Cautious action produces predictable outcomes. Predictable outcomes preserve stability, not dominance. Groups optimize for survivability, never for conquest. The moment you include others in a decision, you introduce psychological taxation. Now every action must pass through interpretation filters. Will this concern them? Will this disrupt balance? Will this alter status inside the group? Your strategy becomes social mathematics, and social mathematics punishes speed. A solitary decision moves at the pace of thought. A collective decision moves at the pace of comfort. Comfort is the true currency of alliances. People do not protect each other because they are loyal. They protect each other because mutual protection guarantees mutual psychological safety. Each member silently agrees to not destabilize the other's self-image. You do not expose my weakness. I do not expose yours. That is the contract. Truth becomes negotiable because honesty threatens cohesion. This is why groups unconsciously edit reality. Not lying, buffering. Harsh conclusions are softened. Clear judgments are delayed. Direct action is postponed. They call this consideration. It is actually risk minimization. An ally is someone who has leverage over your hesitation. The more someone is emotionally invested in your actions, the more you must calculate their reaction before acting. Now you are no longer confronting reality. You are managing perceptions. Perception management replaces strategy. And here is the trap. It feels intelligent. You believe you are being wise, diplomatic, strategic. In reality, you are converting decisive energy into social maintenance. Your attention shifts from outcomes to interpretations, from execution to explanation. Dependence is subtle because it disguises itself as cooperation. You start asking for opinions not to gain information, but to distribute responsibility. If the result fails, it was we. If it succeeds, it was us. The individual disappears into plural language. Plural language protects identity. The solitary mind cannot hide inside we. Every result is personal. Precision sharpens because self-deception becomes expensive. Alone, you either see correctly or suffer immediately. Groups delay suffering. Individuals accelerate learning. This is why dependence feels stable but stagnates power. The system rewards emotional equilibrium, not accuracy. Anyone who introduces uncomfortable clarity threatens the balance and becomes pressure on the structure. So the structure pushes back, not aggressively, gently. Advice, concern, perspective, timing, all calibrated to slow decisive movement until it fits group tolerance. You interpret this as support because resistance arrives wrapped in care. But support that requires you to adjust your direction is not support. It is steering. The dependent man believes multiple minds produce superior decisions. Sometimes true for survival problems, never true for dominance problems. Dominance requires unilateral clarity, no vote, no diffusion, no emotional referendum. Because the moment others share ownership of your path, they share veto power over your speed, and speed determines control. This is the second fracture. Allies reduce fear by absorbing consequences. But whoever absorbs consequences also shapes decisions. Protection and control are the same contract written from opposite perspectives. You called it cooperation. It was governance. The three types of allies you think betrayal is a rare event. It is. It only feels rare because you define betrayal emotionally, a dramatic moment, an obvious stab, a visible enemy. But most betrayal is structural, predictable, quiet, built into the role people occupy in your life. An ally does not betray you when they turn against you. They betray you when their incentives finally speak louder than their words. There are only three kinds. The opportunist stands beside momentum, not beside you. He is loyal to trajectory. When you rise, he attaches. When you stall, he recalculates. His language is encouragement because encouragement costs nothing while proximity offers access. You mistake consistency of presence for consistency of allegiance. Watch carefully. He never anchors himself to your values, only to your direction. The moment your decisions threaten his potential advantage, concern appears. He will not oppose you directly. He will suggest adjustments that protect his positioning. If you accelerate, he urges caution. If you withdraw, he advises patience. If you risk, he recommends stability. He is not malicious. He is economic. Your fall is not his intention, but it is acceptable collateral if his trajectory remains intact. When separation becomes necessary, he will leave cleanly and without guilt because in his internal logic, he never belonged to you, only to the opportunity surrounding you. You call this change. It is alignment correction. The parasite does not want your success. He wants your capacity. He bonds through emotional reliance, shared struggle, confessions, mutual understanding. You feel close because he requires you, and requirement feels like value. But his stability depends on your availability. Every time you sharpen your focus, he introduces urgency. Every time you withdraw attention, he introduces crisis, not consciously, structurally. Your growth threatens his supply of psychological support, so he anchors you with importance. He will praise your strength while quietly demanding access to it. If you move beyond the relationship's emotional economy, guilt appears. Distance becomes accusation. Independence becomes coldness. You believe you are abandoning him. In reality, you are exiting a dependency system where your energy was the resource. The parasite never plans betrayal because he never plans separation. He assumes permanence. But the moment you enforce boundaries, affection converts to resentment. Not because you harmed him, because you stopped feeding the structure that defined his security. He doesn't attack you. He punishes your autonomy. The coward is the most dangerous because he believes he is loyal. He agrees in private and retreats in pressure. Conflict reorganizes his values instantly. Preservation overrides principle. He will stand with you in calm conditions and disappear at the first cost. Not deception, survival instinct. When stakes rise, the group becomes safer than the individual. He will not betray you intentionally. He will simply choose the environment that minimizes his risk. Later, he will rationalize it as complexity, misunderstanding, or timing. You expected resistance beside you. You discovered absence instead. And absence at the critical moment is the purest betrayal. You see now, the opportunist follows advantage. The parasite follows supply. The coward follows safety. None follow you. All alliances eventually intersect with pressure, and pressure reveals governing incentives. Loyalty is not a moral trait. It is a temporary alignment of interests under low stress. You never lost people. You reached conditions where their incentives became visible. Betrayal did not occur in the moment they left. It occurred the moment you believed they were bound to you rather than to themselves. History belongs to the isolated. The crowd remembers heroes. History records anomalies. Every era praises unity while being reshaped by individuals who ignored it. The pattern repeats so consistently that it stops being coincidence and becomes law. Decisive change originates from a mind willing to stand without consensus. Groups maintain the present. Individuals alter the future. A collective can administer power, defend power, distribute power, but it cannot originate power. Origin requires a break from shared assumptions, and shared assumptions are precisely what groups protect. Agreement stabilizes reality. Creation destabilizes it. This is why decisive figures always appear unreasonable to their time. Not immoral, premature. They act on conclusions others have not psychologically prepared to accept. The crowd interprets this as arrogance because independent certainty looks like defiance when viewed from dependence. The herd requires validation before action. The isolated man acts before validation exists. Understand the sequence. First comes rejection, then resistance, then reinterpretation. What begins as recklessness becomes bravery only after success rewrites memory. Society retroactively grants permission to what it originally tried to suppress. Not because society was wrong, but because society is designed to resist volatility. Stability is its survival mechanism. If every individual acted with unilateral conviction, collective order would fracture. So cultures instinctively reward conformity traits: agreeability, patience, coordination, compromise. These are survival virtues for groups, but they are inhibitors for transformation. A system cannot encourage disruption without risking itself. So it teaches you that allies are strength, because allies guarantee predictability. Predictability guarantees continuity. Continuity guarantees safety. But safety and advancement move in opposite directions. The man who moves first moves alone because no one else can see from his position yet. Vision isolates by definition. If others already agree, the action is no longer pioneering, it is administrative. You wanted allies before action. That demand ensures you will only act on what is already socially approved, which means your path can only exist inside existing boundaries. You will navigate reality, never redefine it. Consensus is evidence the decision is late. The crowd steps in when uncertainty collapses. Once risk decreases, agreement increases. This is why support arrives after proof. Encouragement follows results. Loyalty strengthens after safety appears. You interpreted this as people believing in you. They believed in the outcome, not the vision. The isolated individual does not possess greater courage. He possesses fewer negotiations. Without social synchronization requirements, his decisions compress time between thought and execution. Speed creates asymmetry. Asymmetry creates control. Groups debate until clarity becomes comfortable. The solitary mind moves while clarity is still sharp and dangerous. Most never act at that stage because they seek psychological insurance, reassurance that they will not stand alone if wrong. But every meaningful shift begins exactly there, unsupported, unconfirmed, and socially irrational. This is the cost of authorship. To originate instead of participate, you must tolerate being interpreted as unstable before being recognized as accurate. Allies cannot accompany you in that phase because their presence would require them to share your uncertainty, and people only share certainty, so they wait. And waiting positions them permanently behind the one who moved. The pattern is unforgiving. The group preserves the world. The individual rearranges it, and the price of rearranging it is temporary exile from agreement. You are taught isolation signals danger. In reality, at decisive moments, isolation signals proximity to control. Operating without witnesses, once you remove the need for allies, a problem appears. You no longer know how to act without being seen. Most behavior is performance calibrated for observers, speech adjusted for approval, decisions softened for interpretation. Even ambition is often announced early, not to commit to it, but to receive psychological reinforcement before difficulty begins. Witnesses create comfort, but witnesses also create hesitation. The moment others know your direction, your mind splits into two processes: execution and perception management. Part of you advances toward the objective. Another part constantly predicts reactions, questions, doubts, expectations, judgments. This second process consumes precision. So the first discipline is silence, not secrecy out of fear, secrecy out of efficiency. Unspoken plans cannot be negotiated. Unannounced movement cannot be slowed by opinion. When intention remains internal, action remains direct. You stop managing emotional climates and start managing outcomes. Information invites influence. Every person informed about your trajectory acquires leverage over its pace. Even supportive people alter timing simply by existing as an audience. You begin shaping decisions into narratable steps rather than effective ones. You explain before you achieve. Explanation is premature accountability. It binds you to consistency when adaptation is required. Once others know your path, changing strategy feels like contradiction. Alone, adjustment is intelligence. Observed, adjustment feels like instability. So you freeze. Operating without witnesses restores fluidity. You move, correct, discard, and restart without social inertia. Failure loses its theater. It becomes data instead of identity. Next comes asymmetry. Predictable men are controllable men. When others can anticipate your reactions, they begin interacting with your pattern instead of you. You become manageable because your behavior fits expectation loops. The solitary operator breaks loops. You respond based on outcome, not emotional momentum. No immediate replies. No reflex justifications. No defending your reasoning to maintain image continuity. Time becomes a weapon, delay where others expect speed, move where others expect hesitation. You stop participating in emotional rhythm. This unsettles people because most interaction is synchronization. Agreement in tempo reassures them of stability. When your timing no longer aligns, they lose predictive comfort. And what cannot be predicted cannot be easily manipulated. Then selective visibility. You are not invisible, you are intermittent. Presence only where it alters results. Absence where it only maintains relationships. You appear to execute, disappear to think. Others remain constantly available because availability signals loyalty inside social systems. But availability is accessibility. Accessibility invites interference. Distance removes commentary. Without constant input, your decisions become internally coherent instead of collectively patched. You no longer average perspectives, you refine direction. Finally, no emotional negotiations. You state less. You promise nothing. You do not secure approval before action or forgiveness after action. Outcomes speak. Explanations shrink. People will interpret this as coldness because they lost participation in your process. Previously, they influenced direction through dialogue. Now they only encounter results. Results end debate. Operating alone does not make you antisocial. It makes your actions non-democratic. And non-democratic action feels threatening to those accustomed to shared authorship. They will attempt to reopen dialogue, not to understand, but to regain influence. You refuse gently, consistently, and without hostility, because hostility invites engagement. Calm finality ends it. You are not hiding, you are removing friction, and friction was never coming from difficulty, it was coming from witnesses. Death of the social self, the hardest separation, is not from people. It is from the version of you that required them. Your identity was constructed through reflection. Reactions shaped posture. Approval shaped tone. Even defiance was calibrated against expectation. You did not become yourself, you negotiated yourself into existence. The social self is a composite character, part instinct, part audience adaptation. It survives through recognition. When recognition disappears, panic begins, not because you are alone, but because the character has no reference points. No signals confirming its shape, no responses confirming its position, so it tries to resurrect the old system. You feel urges to explain again, to update others, to check reactions, to soften decisions, not for strategy, for orientation. The mind wants mirrors because mirrors stabilize identity. Without mirrors, identity becomes self-defined. And self-definition feels like risk because there is no external correction. Every decision becomes irreversible authorship. You cannot distribute interpretation across a group. Meaning comes from outcome, not agreement. This is where most people retreat. They reintroduce allies not for help, but for psychological borders. Others mark the edges of who they are. Without those edges, they fear becoming excessive, unfair, extreme. They call this balance. But balance is often dependency disguised as virtue. The social self prioritizes being understood. The sovereign self prioritizes being effective. These cannot dominate simultaneously. One requires negotiation. The other requires unilateral acceptance of consequences. To replace the social self, you must accept misinterpretation as permanent background noise. People will not update their model of you in real time. They will preserve the previous version because it stabilizes their expectations. Your transformation forces them to operate without predictive certainty, and uncertainty feels like threat. So they simplify you: cold, arrogant, detached, different. Labels are compression algorithms. They reduce complexity into manageable categories so others can interact without recalculating. Once labeled, they stop examining. This is freedom. When approval is no longer required, reputation becomes irrelevant to decision-making. You no longer adjust truth to maintain relational harmony. You accept relational fallout as operational cost, the old identity negotiated to avoid loss. The new identity absorbs loss to avoid distortion. There is a death here, the death of explaining yourself to preserve connection. You stop translating your intent into comforting language. Precision replaces diplomacy. Silence replaces reassurance, not cruelty, finality. You do not seek to be misunderstood. You simply stop preventing it. Because preventing misunderstanding requires constant self-editing, and self-editing fragments clarity. The sovereign individual accepts that accuracy to reality will often appear harsh to those invested in interpretation. The reward is coherence. Your actions align without internal contradiction because they are no longer filtered through anticipated reactions. Decisions stop circling social consequences and start targeting material outcomes. You become predictable only to yourself. The need to be liked dissolves, not suppressed, rendered unnecessary. Approval once functioned as emotional fuel. Now results function as orientation. Direction comes from effectiveness, not acceptance. The social self wanted belonging before movement. The sovereign self moves and accepts whoever remains. At this point, allies cannot be lost, because they are no longer structural to your identity. You have not rejected people. You have rejected the necessity of them to define you. And that is the moment solitude stops feeling empty and starts feeling precise. Final law of solitary power, there is a consequence no one tells you. The moment you stop needing allies, people feel it before you say anything. Independence has a pressure signature. You no longer negotiate tone, timing, or direction to maintain comfort. Conversations shorten. Explanations disappear. Decisions arrive already concluded. This removes the invisible participation others once had in your life. They experience this as exclusion. Not because you pushed them away, because they lost influence. Most relationships are built on shared authorship. Small inputs, subtle adjustments, mutual steering. When that access disappears, people cannot locate themselves inside your decisions anymore. Without a role, they feel displaced. Displacement becomes hostility. They will call you distant, changed, difficult. They will attempt to reopen old channels, advice, concern, memory, obligation. Each attempt is not communication. It is a bid to restore leverage over your movement. If it works, your autonomy becomes temporary. So the final discipline is irreversibility. You do not announce your philosophy. You embody a pattern. Calm refusals, short confirmations, no emotional debate. You neither justify nor provoke. Reaction feeds negotiation. Neutrality ends it. Over time, people stop testing boundaries they cannot move. Respect replaces familiarity. Some will leave because connection without influence feels hollow to them. Others will stay but adapt, interacting with you through outcomes instead of persuasion. The structure of every relationship reorganizes around your stability. This is the hidden effect of solitude. It selects your environment without confrontation. When you required allies, you adjusted yourself to maintain bonds. Now bonds adjust themselves to maintain access. The direction of adaptation reverses. You are no longer maintained by your circle. Your circle is filtered by your consistency. And here is the final warning. Once you experience decisions untouched by social pressure, returning becomes impossible. The old life will feel theatrical, endless explanation, constant emotional calibration, perpetual hesitation. You will see how much of human interaction is negotiation disguised as care. You cannot unsee leverage. This does not make you superior. It makes you incompatible with dependency systems. Some will interpret that as coldness because warmth to them means mutual influence. But influence is exactly what you have removed from the core of your behavior. You interact without surrendering direction. The result is a quieter existence and a sharper one. Fewer voices, clearer outcomes, less comfort, more control. You began searching for allies to feel secure in uncertainty. Now uncertainty becomes your operating terrain because you no longer wait for agreement before movement. This is solitary power. Action without witnesses, direction without permission, consequence without negotiation. Nothing dramatic changes outwardly, but internally a law locks into place. You move first. Understanding arrives later, for them, not for you. And once you live that way, companionship becomes optional, loyalty becomes irrelevant, and approval becomes noise. The door does not close loudly. It simply never opens again.